Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The hum of the conference hall was a familiar beast. A low, insistent thrum of 100 conversations, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter or the clinking of glasses. I smoothed down the front of my silk blouse, a deep sapphire blue that Robert, my husband, always said brought out the color of my eyes. He was somewhere in this throng, probably deep in conversation with a fellow engineer, talking about, well, whatever it is engineers get excited about. I loved him dearly, Robert, but these corporate events, these yearly conferences his company, Innovate Solutions, hosted, always left me feeling a little like a well-dressed accessory, necessary for appearances, but not entirely sure of my function. This year it was in San Diego, at a sprawling hotel complex that seemed to have its own zip code. The main ballroom, where the evening's cocktail reception was being held, was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a perfectly manicured garden, now bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Crystal chandeliers, looking like frozen fireworks, hung from the impossibly high ceiling. It was all very grand, very impressive, and if I'm being honest, a little impersonal. I'd been to enough of these to know the routine. Smile, make small talk, try to look engaged when Robert introduced me to yet another colleague whose name I'd forget within minutes. I found a relatively quiet spot near a pillar, nursing a glass of Chardonnay, watching the ebb and flow of people. Robert was a senior manager now, respected in his field. His success was a quiet source of pride for me, even if it meant enduring these occasional social marathons. He caught my eye from across the room and gave me that small, reassuring smile of his. I smiled back, a genuine one this time. He knew I wasn't entirely in my element, but he appreciated me being here. That's just how we were, a comfortable rhythm built over 30 years of marriage. That's when I first properly noticed Lucas Vance, Robert's boss, the CEO. He was holding court near the elaborate cheese display, a circle of attentive listeners around him. Lucas was a man who commanded attention without seeming to try. He wasn't overly tall, but he had a presence, an air of quiet confidence that was almost magnetic. He was probably in his late 50s, with neatly styled salt and pepper hair, and eyes that seemed to take in everything without being intrusive. I'd met him a few times before, of course, brief handshakes and polite greetings at previous events. He'd always been perfectly cordial, asking after our kids or commenting on the weather, but our interactions had never strayed beyond the surface level. He was, after all, the big boss. Tonight, though, something seemed different. Maybe it was the lighting, or maybe it was just my overactive imagination, but as his gaze swept the room, it paused on me for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Not in an uncomfortable way, not at all. It was more thoughtful, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. I quickly looked away, feeling a strange little flutter in my chest, telling myself I was being silly. He was probably just trying to place me. Robert's wife, his mind would be cataloging. Diana. I took another sip of my wine, trying to shake off the odd feeling. The conversations around me faded into a pleasant blur. I thought about the book waiting for me back in the hotel room, a historical novel I was halfway through. That was my real speed, a quiet evening with a good story. A few minutes later, Robert reappeared by my side, his arm warm around my waist. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, his brow furrowed with that familiar concern. "Perfectly fine," I assured him. "Just enjoying the ambience." He chuckled. "Ambience? Is that what we're calling it?" He leaned in. Old Henderson cornered me by the shrimp cocktail, nearly talked my ear off about his new speedboat. I squeezed his arm. "The price of success, my dear. Tell me about it." He scanned the room. "Oh, there's Lucas. I should probably go say a quick hello, make sure he knows we're here and appreciative of the ambience." I smiled. "Go on. I'll be fine." Still guarding this pillar. Robert headed off, and I watched him navigate the crowd, a sturdy, dependable figure. He was a good man. A kind man. Our life was good. Predictable, yes, but good. I saw him greet Lucas, a brief, respectful exchange. Then, to my surprise, Lucas said something to Robert, and then Robert turned, looking back towards me, a slightly puzzled expression on his face. He gestured subtly in my direction. My heart gave an odd little jump. What now? Lucas then excused himself from the group he was with and began to walk towards me. Not directly, but with a slow, deliberate pace, pausing to exchange a word or two with people he passed. Yet his trajectory was unmistakably in my direction. I felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of nervousness mixed with curiosity. What could the CEO possibly want with me? Was Robert in some kind of trouble? No, that couldn't be it. Robert was a star performer. He reached my little alcove by the pillar. Up close, his eyes were a surprisingly warm hazel flecked with gold. They held a certain weariness, I thought, but also a keen intelligence. Diana, he said, his voice smoother, less corporate than I'd imagined. I hope I'm not interrupting your solitude. Not at all, Mr. Vance, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. Just people watching. Lucas, please, he corrected gently. And people watching can be a fascinating sport, can't it? A small smile played on his lips. Actually, Diana, I was wondering if I might steal you away for a few minutes? There's something I'd like to discuss with you, if you wouldn't mind. In a slightly quieter setting. My mind raced. Discuss with me? About what? The way he said it. Steal you away, quieter setting. Sent a shiver of apprehension down my spine, but also a strange spark of intrigue. This was definitely not in the usual conference script. Robert was now looking over. A mixture of curiosity and perhaps a touch of concern on his face. I gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, hoping to convey that everything was all right, though I wasn't entirely sure it was. Of course, Lucas. I heard myself say, my voice remarkably steady. Lead the way. He offered a slight inclination of his head and gestured towards a glass door at the far end of the ballroom. A door I hadn't noticed before, which seemed to lead out to the gardens. It's much more peaceful out there. My pulse quickened. What on earth could this be about? As I fell into step beside him, moving away from the noise and the crowd, I had the distinct feeling that this conference, an event I usually just endured, was about to become unforgettable. You won't believe what happened next. The soft click of the latch as Lucas closed the glass door behind us seemed to seal off the ballroom's cacophony, leaving us in an entirely different world. We stepped out onto a stone terrace, the air immediately cooler, fragrant with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth. The meticulously landscaped garden was lit by discreetly placed uplights, casting long, dancing shadows from the palm trees and exotic shrubs. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, a soothing counterpoint to the distant, muted thrum of the party. It was an oasis of calm. Much better, don't you think? Lucas said, his voice softer now, more personal. He didn't look at me immediately, but gazed out at the garden for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. It's beautiful out here, I agreed, genuinely struck by the tranquility. My initial nervousness was still there, a faint hum beneath the surface, but it was being overlaid with a growing sense of anticipation. What was so important that it required this level of privacy? He turned to face me then, leaning slightly against the stone balustrade. The light from a nearby lantern caught the silver in his hair, and I could see the fine lines around his eyes, lines that spoke of long hours and weighty decisions, but also, perhaps, of a life fully lived. Diana, he began, his tone serious yet gentle. I hope this isn't too forward of me, pulling you away like this. It's just, well, Robert has been with Innovate Solutions for, what is it now? 15 years. 16 this past April. I supplied, a little surprised. Was this about Robert's career? A promotion? Or worse, a problem? Lucas nodded. 16 years. A significant portion of a man's life. He's an exceptional engineer, you know. Dedicated, brilliant. One of our very best. Thank you, I said, feeling a swell of pride for Robert. He loves his work. He does. And he's incredibly loyal to the company, Lucas continued, his gaze steady on mine. But that's not precisely what I wanted to talk to you about. Or not entirely. He paused, and the silence stretched for a moment, filled only by the chirping of crickets. My mind was a blank slate, trying to guess where this was leading. Over the years, Lucas said, his voice dropping a little lower, I've learned that behind every successful, dedicated employee, there's often an equally remarkable support system. A partner, a family, someone who provides the balance, the understanding, the anchor. He looked directly at me, and his eyes held a warmth that was surprisingly disarming. Robert talks about you a great deal, Diana. More than you probably realize. My breath caught in my throat. This was unexpected. I'd always assumed I was just a name, a spouse mentioned in passing. He does. I managed, my voice barely a whisper. Oh yes, Lucas affirmed with a soft smile. Not in long, detailed accounts, of course. Robert's a private man in many ways. But it's in the small things. The way his face lights up when he mentions a weekend you spent together, or a trip you're planning. The quiet confidence he exudes, knowing he has someone steadfast in his corner. He pushed himself off the balustrade and took a couple of slow steps along the terrace, then turned back. I see a lot of people in my position, Diana. I see ambition, I see drive, I see stress. And I also see the toll it can take on personal lives. But with Robert, there's always been a sense of stability, of contentment, that I've long admired. And I've always suspected you were a very large part of that foundation. I was speechless. Absolutely speechless. This wasn't a lecture, or a business discussion, or anything I could have possibly anticipated. This was profoundly personal. And deeply moving. To think that Lucas Vance, the CEO, had not only noticed but given thought to the dynamics of my marriage to Robert, to my role in Robert's life, it was overwhelming. I don't know what to say, I finally stammered, feeling a blush creep up my neck. That's very kind of you to notice, to say. It's not kindness, Diana, he said, his expression earnest. It's an observation. And perhaps, he hesitated, then continued. A recognition of something I value immensely, something that, perhaps, I didn't always appreciate as I should have in my own life. The air grew charged with a different kind of energy then. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was deeply intimate. He was sharing something of himself, a vulnerability I hadn't expected from a man in his position. You see, he went on, his gaze drifting back to the garden, a wistful look in his eyes. My late wife Eleanor, she was very much like that. The quiet strength behind everything. The one who made sense of the chaos. I was driven, always focused on the next goal, the next achievement. He gave a small, self-deprecating sigh. I often wonder if I told her enough how much she meant, not just to me, but to everything I managed to build. My heart ached at his words, at the undisguised pain and regret that colored his tone. This was no longer about Robert and me. This was about Lucas, about his past, his loss. I'm so sorry, Lucas, I said softly. I didn't know about your wife. He looked back at me, a faint, sad smile on his lips. It was a long time ago. Cancer. She was brave. Far braver than I ever was. He paused, then seemed to consciously steer the conversation back. But seeing you and Robert over the years, it's been a reminder. A reminder of what truly matters. And tonight, watching you both from across the room, there was a serenity, a connection. It's a rare thing. He then looked at me with an intensity that was startling, yet not unsettling. What I wanted to say, Diana, was thank you. Thank me. I was bewildered. For what? For being that anchor for Robert. For creating the kind of partnership that allows good men like him to flourish, not just professionally, but as human beings. It's a contribution that often goes unseen, unacknowledged in a corporate world obsessed with bottom lines and quarterly reports. But it's vital, perhaps the most vital thing of all. Tears pricked at my eyes. Unseen, unacknowledged. He had seen it. He was acknowledging it. A man I barely knew, a man at the pinnacle of my husband's company, had taken the time to tell me this. It was as if a hidden part of my life, the quiet, steady work of love and support I'd poured into my marriage and family for decades, had suddenly been illuminated, recognized for its true worth. The feeling was indescribable. It wasn't just validation. It was a profound sense of being truly seen. The weight of his words settled around me, a comforting warmth rather than a burden. For so many years, I'd defined my presence at these events as purely supportive, a secondary role. And in many ways it was. But Lucas, in his quiet, thoughtful way, had reframed it. He hadn't diminished Robert's achievements. He'd simply highlighted the ecosystem that allowed them to grow. He'd given voice to the silent partnership that underpins so much of life, a partnership that often operates in the background, unassuming but essential. Lucas, I began, my voice thick with emotion. That is one of the most profound things anyone has ever said to me. I took a shaky breath, trying to gather my thoughts. We women of my generation, perhaps many generations, we often pour ourselves into our families, our partners. And we don't expect accolades. It's a labor of love, truly. But to have it acknowledged, especially by someone like you, it means more than I can say. He listened intently, his expression softening. I'm glad it resonates, Diana. It's something that's been on my mind for a while, to be honest. Perhaps I should have said something sooner, but these events, they aren't always conducive to meaningful conversation. He gestured vaguely back towards the ballroom. Too much noise, not enough signal. A small laugh escaped me. That's a very good way to put it. Eleanor used to say something similar, he mused, a distant look in his eyes again. She said most people listen only enough to figure out when it's their turn to talk. She sounds like she was a very wise woman, I said gently. She was, he affirmed, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. Far wiser than I. She understood people. She understood what made them tick, what they truly needed. I was always about the what, the targets, the results. She was about the who and the why. It struck me then, the layers of this unexpected encounter. Lucas wasn't just complimenting me, or sharing a personal anecdote. He was, in his own way, reflecting on his own life, his own learnings. There was a humility there, a candidness that I found incredibly moving. He, the powerful CEO, was admitting to a certain short-sightedness in his past, a reevaluation of what true success meant. And he was choosing to share this moment of introspection with me, Robert's wife. Perhaps, I ventured, feeling a new sense of courage, a connection forged in this shared moment of vulnerability. You learned more from her wisdom than you give yourself credit for. To see what you saw tonight, to articulate it the way you have, that takes a certain kind of wisdom too. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly followed by a thoughtful expression. He seemed to genuinely consider my words. Perhaps, he conceded slowly. Grief is a strange teacher, Diana. It strips away the non-essentials. It forces you to see what's real, what truly endures. The garden seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds were the gentle whisper of the wind, and the distant pulse of the party, now seeming a world away. Robert is a lucky man, Lucas said, his gaze returning to me, clear and direct. Not just for his talent, but for having you. Don't ever underestimate your importance, Diana. Not to him, not to the fabric of things. The lump in my throat was so large I wasn't sure I could speak. I nodded, my eyes glistening. Thank you, Lucas. Truly. I won't forget this. Nor will I, he said with a sincerity that touched me to my core. He glanced back towards the ballroom. I should probably let you get back. And I suspect Robert might be wondering if I've absconded with his wife. A rare, genuine smile lit up his face, erasing some of the weariness I'd seen earlier. He probably thinks you're discussing his next big project, I said, managing a watery smile in return. Let him think that for a little longer, Lucas said, a hint of playful conspiracy in his tone. It's good to keep them guessing sometimes. He extended his hand. It was a genuine pleasure speaking with you, Diana. More than you know. I placed my hand in his. His grip was firm, warm. Not a cursory business handshake, but something more significant. A gesture of respect, of connection. The pleasure was all mine, Lucas. Thank you for seeing. He held my gaze for another moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between us, then released my hand. Enjoy the rest of your evening. With a slight nod, he turned and walked back towards the glass door, his silhouette momentarily framed against the bright lights of the ballroom before he disappeared inside. I remained on the terrace for a few minutes more, letting the cool air wash over me, my emotions swirling. The initial shock had given way to a profound sense of warmth, of being deeply understood. It was as if a window had been opened into my own life, showing me a view I hadn't fully appreciated. The quiet, steady rhythm of my days, the love and support I'd always considered just part of being a wife and mother, had been given a name, a value. by an unexpected source. Lucas Vance, my husband's boss. He'd pulled me aside, and what happened was not at all what I, or anyone, would ever have believed. It wasn't about business or promotions or any of the usual conference fare. It was about connection, about the things that truly underpin a life well lived. It was about being seen. And in that quiet garden, under the soft glow of the lanterns, I felt a sense of personal discovery, a quiet affirmation that resonated deep within my soul. I took a deep breath, the scent of jasmine filling my lungs, and felt a sense of peace, and an unexpected surge of gratitude. The night, which had started so mundanely, had suddenly become one of the most significant of my life. When I re-entered the ballroom, the noise hit me with full force, a stark contrast to the serenity of the garden. I blinked, readjusting to the bright lights and the swirling kaleidoscope of people. It felt as though I'd been away for hours, though I knew it could only have been 15, maybe 20 minutes at most. I scanned the room for Robert, and found him standing near the edge of a group, his attention clearly divided between the conversation he was supposed to be part of and looking out for me. His relief when he saw me was palpable. He immediately excused himself and came towards me, his expression a mixture of concern and intense curiosity. "Diana, there you are. Is everything okay? What did Lucas want?" he asked in a low voice, his hand finding mine. I squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Everything's more than okay, Rob," I said, my voice still carrying a trace of the emotion from the terrace. It was surprising, and actually very nice. Robert looked at me, really looked at me, and must have seen something different in my eyes, a certain glow perhaps. "Nice. Lucas Vance pulled you out to the garden for a private chat, and it was nice?" He raised an eyebrow. "Honey, you look a little, I don't know, different." "In a good way," he added quickly. I smiled. "It's a bit of a story. Let's just say your boss has a perspective on things that I wouldn't have expected." "Oh." He was clearly intrigued. "Like what? Did he talk about the new expansion project? Or my team's performance?" "No, nothing like that," I said, guiding him towards a slightly less crowded area. "It was more personal. He talked about you, actually. About us." Robert stopped. "Us? What about us?" There was a touch of apprehension in his voice now. I relayed the essence of the conversation, omitting some of Lucas's more personal revelations about his late wife, as that felt like a confidence I should keep. I told Robert how Lucas had spoken of his dedication, his loyalty, and then how he'd spoken of the importance of a supportive partnership, how he'd acknowledged my role in Robert's stability and success. I told him Lucas had thanked me. As I spoke, Robert's expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment, and then to a deep, quiet tenderness. He listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on my face. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, seemingly processing it all. "Wow," he said finally, his voice a little husky. "Lucas Vance said all that? To you?" I nodded. He did. Robert reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from my temple. "Well, he's not wrong, you know." His eyes, so familiar and dear to me, were filled with an emotion that made my heart swell. "You are my anchor, Diana. You always have been. I guess I don't say it enough. Or maybe I assume you just know." "I know you love me, Robert," I said softly. "And that's always been enough. But hearing someone else see it, someone like Lucas, it was unexpected," Robert finished for me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "And pretty amazing, I'd say." He shook his head slightly, as if still marveling at the thought. "I always knew Lucas was a decent man, a good leader. But this shows a depth I hadn't fully grasped." We stood there for a moment, a little island of quiet understanding in the midst of the bustling reception. The conversation with Lucas hadn't just been a gift to me. It had, in its own way, been a gift to Robert too, and perhaps to our marriage. It brought to the surface unspoken truths, reaffirmed the foundations we had built together over decades. Later that evening, as we walked back to our hotel room, arm in arm, the city lights of San Diego twinkling around us, Robert was still reflective. "You know," he said, "it makes me think. Lucas has been through a lot. Losing Eleanor like that, it must have shaped him profoundly." "I think it did," I agreed. He seems to carry that with him, not as a burden, but as a source of understanding. And for him to share any of that with you, Robert continued, looking at me with renewed appreciation. That says a lot about what he saw in you, Diana. That night, sleep didn't come easily, but it wasn't an anxious wakefulness. It was a gentle replay of the conversation, of Lucas's words, of the unexpected emotional resonance of the encounter. I thought about the assumptions we make about people, especially people in positions of power. We see the titles, the corporate personas, and we forget the human being underneath, with their own stories, their own heartaches, their own wisdom. The experience didn't magically transform my life in some grand, dramatic fashion. I was still Diana, Robert's wife, mother to our grown children, a woman content in her own quiet way. But something had shifted within me. A subtle recalibration. I felt a renewed sense of my own worth, not as an appendage to Robert's success, but as an integral part of it, a partner in the truest sense of the word. And more than that, I felt seen. Seen for the quiet contributions, the steady love, the unwavering support that I, and so many women like me, provide every single day. The next morning, at the conference's closing breakfast, I saw Lucas Vance across the room. He was surrounded by his senior team, back in his role as CEO. He happened to look up, his gaze sweeping the room, and his eyes met mine. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a faint smile touching his lips. I smiled back, a genuine, knowing smile. It was a silent acknowledgement of the shared moment from the night before. A little secret understanding in the midst of the corporate hustle. In the weeks and months that followed, that conversation on the terrace remained a quiet touchstone for me. Whenever I felt a little invisible, or when the routines of life felt mundane, I would remember Lucas's words. Don't ever underestimate your importance, Diana. It wasn't about seeking external validation, but about recognizing the inherent value in the life I had built, the love I had nurtured. It also changed subtly my perception of Robert's work life. I felt a deeper connection to that part of his world, understanding that at the very top, there was a man who, despite the pressures of his position, possessed a profound humanity and an appreciation for the things that truly mattered. It made me feel more like a part of his professional journey, not just a spectator. The conference in San Diego became more than just another corporate event I had to attend. It became the place where a quiet conversation in a moonlit garden opened up a new layer of understanding and self-awareness. It was a reminder that meaningful connections can happen in the most unexpected places, at the most unexpected times, and with the most unexpected people. Lucas Vance, my husband's boss, pulled me aside that evening, and what happened was indeed something you wouldn't believe, not for its drama, but for its quiet depth and its lasting impact on my heart. It taught me that sometimes, the most profound discoveries are not about finding something new, but about seeing the familiar with fresh eyes, and recognizing the quiet strength that has been there all along. And that, I think, is a story worth sharing.